This is the Rare Report. I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Rose Pringle, who is a special individual who has retired from the University of Florida College of Education. During the time that she was at the University of Florida College of Education, she made an impactful difference in the lives of her students and those who were in her classes. So welcome.
Thank you.
May I call you Rose?
Sure.
Rose, we'd like to hear about your involvement, how you became a teacher. Where did you begin your desire to become a teacher? Why did you want to become a teacher? Let's start there, maybe.
Okay. So I am from a very small town in Jamaica. We call it a little district. And so I grew up in a place where we never had electric lights, we never had running water at the start. And so education was kind of that support that would take you out of that district. My mother impressed, especially on me being the eldest, that you have to get the education to get out of this town. And if you do not do well, then my other 6 kids will not do well. So I had it on me. So who did I see in my district? My primary school teacher, a nurse who came to our clinic once every month. So that was the essence of who I saw growing up, or where I could see my future. And I really, really liked my grade 6 elementary teacher. She was really good, and I think she saw in me the capabilities to go far. She got me involved in the spelling bee. So I was a spelling bee champion for my school, and then came third at the at the other level. And in Jamaica, you have to pass a common entrance to go to high school. So it's not automatic. So you do the exams at the end of 6th grade, and depending on your scores, you get your name comes out in the newspaper, and you're told what school you're placed. The first time I took it, I was the only one from my primary school that got accepted into the high school. The high school was very far from my house, and it means then that my mother would have to pay boarding. She could not afford it, so I did not go to high school the first year. The second year I took it again, and 2 of us passed from our primary school. And I remember my mother telling everybody that even if they never had anything to eat, but I was going to high school. This one was closer. It was 15 miles away, no bus. So, it's going by foot, getting a ride in a truck So I got into high school. When I got to high school, I really liked it. But I think the impression, the opportunities that impressed me most, I had a biology teacher in 10th grade, Mr. Butt, from Saskatchewan, Canada. So in those
From
days,
Canada, he traveled to Jamaica to be a teacher.
At that point in time, we had teachers, they called them expats, who came from other countries, because we never had enough high school teachers. But he made me love biology. He made me love to study biology. It was all hands on. We were out into the bushes. We were out by the seaside. Everything that we did, it was done with our hands and learning. And I just realized that I loved biology, I loved science, and I wanted to teach. So I had my primary school teacher, Miss Humes, very prim and proper woman. When she walked on the street, everybody, no matter what they were doing, at attention. If they were smoking, the cigarette went someplace else. So that was something, that I wanted to aspire to. And of course, the whole idea that would help my family, my mother and her kids, to move out of, where we're coming from, or where we lived at that point in time. And so I graduated high school, and fortunately for me, at that time, the government had a program where when you graduated high school, you could do what was called National Youth Service. You chose the field that you wanted to go in. So I chose education. If you did National Youth Service, you went to college for free. They paid your funding. So I did my National Youth Service, and I went to Teachers College and became a high school science teacher. So I started there. But I practiced on my siblings this whole teaching thing from very early. My sisters and my brothers, I taught them. And it's ironic now when I look back, it was all about rote learning. You got to read, you got to remember. And I think if I was to do it again, having all these experiences, my approach to teaching would have been different. And I think they would have loved it more. But so that's where I started. And I got into college and I did what was called double option science. So you do two science disciplines and your elective was mathematics. And so I did biology and chemistry, and mathematics was my electives. So upon graduation, I got employed at the Queen's High School in Kingston. So now I'm out of the country area, I'm in Kingston. And this was one of our top high schools. This school had, the children from England whose parents were, in the government or in the service or had the US ambassador's children. So that was the high school for girls. And I worked there for 9 years. And then I got my fellowship, my scholarship to come to the United States to do a master's degree.
At Florida State.
At Florida State. Actually, then I had to do the GRE, and I had to apply to a number of schools. I got accepted to a number of schools, and I chose Florida State University because I was kind of familiar with Florida. So you would travel to Florida, to Miami to do shopping when it's coming to Christmas and so on. So I figured I was going to some place that was 90 minutes flight and I'm in Florida. But when I landed in Miami, when I was going to Tallahassee for the first time, it was landing 3 hours, and then you get to Tallahassee. And that wasn't quite nice, but I ended up liking Florida State University. So I got there. My charge was leadership and higher education. That was my charge coming to the United States to study. Because at that point in time in my high school experience, I acted like the head of the department. I was involved in developing schedules. I was beginning to do things other than teaching. When I got to Florida State, I remember telling my advisor, my academic advisor, I said, I cannot come to a first world country and not do science. I wanted so much to get into a lab because much of my science at that point in time, teaching high school kids, I was pulling on experiences a couple of years behind. And here I am in a first world country. No, I wanted to be in those labs. So he pushed and I pushed. And then I think he got a little bit fed up. And he said, okay, I know someone who you need to talk to. And he said, Dr. Ken Tobin. And he's on the 2nd floor. We were on the 4th floor. Couldn't find my way down, but I did. I ended up finding Ken. And when I got there, and I shared with him, and I think he realized how passionate I was about teaching science. And we had a good conversation, and he introduced me to science education. Now, I knew nothing about that. I'm a high school science teacher. I do biology, I do chemistry, I do physical science, human and social biology. I do those. And here he was introducing me to a discipline that straddled my two loves, education and science. And so that was the end of my leadership and administrative ordeals. So he helped me to work through with the USAID to have my charge changed to science education. And I have not looked back since. It has been an exciting ride. So when I got back to Jamaica after the master's, I think in some places, they had heard of science education, but the deep understanding wasn't there. So I was employed as a lecturer in the college teaching science education to pre-service teachers.
Yeah, that sounds just like what you had dreamt of doing, right? There. How many students would be in your class that you're teaching science?
In Jamaica?
In Jamaica.
Okay, so you'd have up to like 40. So you taught first years, second years, third year. And you also had teachers coming from schools. So we had to teach night classes also. These were teachers, we call them in-service teachers. They were going through training, and at the same time, they were working. So these were more matured. So we had different classes. 40 students in some cases, the classes were large.
How long between the time that you got your master's degree, you went back to Jamaica, were involved teaching? How long then till you had the opportunity to come back to Florida State for your PhD degree?
So my funding agency mandates that you have to go back to your home country and you had to do 2 years, at least 2 years of service. So I went back, I did my 2 years, and I did 3 more years. When I did the master's, what intrigued me most about everything, the content and the pedagogical pieces, was the research. I really liked the research. Ironically, when I came here, I was a quantitative researcher. I mean, research was about numbers and averages and, all of those. But I was introduced to qualitative research because the questions that I was asking as a science educator at that time required the kind of research which was not different from numbers. It's just that I had different questions that the answers you could not get by just working those numbers. So I wanted to come back to get a deeper understanding of qualitative research, because when you ask what's happening in the classrooms, what's happening with the kids learning, 10% doesn't cut it, or 20%. But if you begin to describe the context and begin now to describe the relationship between the kids, the teachers, and the practices, you get a better understanding of how you can change or impact processes in the classroom. So I came back after 5 years. I saved my heart out to come back for the PhD. My husband at that time he worked with an international company. So there was a joke in my family that he worked and I did the social work, because of course he got paid and I got peanuts. But I saved my peanuts, because then you had to have a certain amount of money to be able to come to America to study on your own. I saved in those 5 years, and I was fortunate, so I was ready. I came back and I did my PhD at Florida State University, and it took 3 years. I had to push to do it because I had 2 kids who were in school and a husband who could not work because he was on a visa, that never allowed him to work. So I had to get out of grad school and get out of there fast. So I did my PhD in 3 years.
Yeah, that's outstanding in terms of today. 3 calendar years. That's a lot of work, a lot of effort.
I lived on campus. I pretty much lived there. I would leave campus at 3 a.m.
What was your thesis?
My thesis was looking at assessment in science education. So it's all about, my dissertation came out of an experience I had teaching.
In high school?
No, at Florida State.
Okay.
I got an assistantship after I got here. And so I taught science education to some elementary teachers, pre-service teachers. They were good. I mean, they were good, really good students, but they were so caught up in their grades. I remember the first assignment that they did. They were having fun. So my teaching involved lots of activities and understanding the content. I remember my first assignment that I gave them. When they did it and they handed back, I'm coming from a country where grading is really nitpicking, pretty much.
Did you have a red pen?
I may have had a red pen, because that's where I was coming from. I remember it was out of 50. And some of them got like 35 out of 50, 40 out of 50. Oh, when I gave that, I made an error the Thursday morning when I walked in. I gave them back their assignment before my class. Well, that was the end of it. They were upset. They quarreled. They said I'm spoiling their scholarship. I'm not an English teacher. Who am I to grade, to put marks on their paper? It was a shock. That was my first experience with grading and assessment in the United States. I remember leaving them and I went to my advisor, my academic advisor. And I went and I said, Nancy, I cannot do this. I said, and she looked at me. So we had this conversation and she said, Rose, are you going to allow those kids upstairs to let you not get to where you want to? And she said, you're going to turn it around. And I went back upstairs and I had to pull on my experiences as a high school teacher as a lecturer in a college, and I really got to the students, but that drove me to begin to understand the assessment system in America and how can I transform that to help the learners. So I started playing around with self-assessment as a tool for continuous improvement. So that became my dissertation. So over the 2.5 years, I actually worked, practiced, and then that became my dissertation where I put the assessment back on the students. So I had all these criteria. They helped me to develop the criteria for the assessment. And then they did the self-assessment, which included, in some cases, numerical, in some cases, narratives, where they reflected on what they knew and what they think they knew and where they wanted to get to. So it became a really neat experience with the students and myself.
So that sounds innovative, novel-like at that time in terms of the self-assessments, right?
It was.
Wow.
There was a scholar in England, Black, who was also he was just coming up with self-assessment, and he had just written a book called The Black Box, unpacking that black box with assessment. And so I really got into it, to really understand how can you invite the learners into the learning process and help them to recognize that it's not the grades, it's what sense you've made of the experiences. But I also, it became clear to me, because this was outside of my experiences, that their scholarships were driven by the grades. So they had to get maintain certain grades to get their funding through their degree. And so who am I to tell them that they cannot do that? So I had to step back a little bit, negotiated until we got to that point.
I'm glad you shared that in terms of where your first step into self-assessments are. I can recall several years ago when I first met you that one of our graduate students were talking about first year of gross anatomy in med, that we did let the students do their pure teaching. And you were the one in terms of brought up in terms for them to rate their questions for their assessments. I mean, now I understand where that came from. Outstanding.
Thank you.
So you graduated from Florida State, and then what was your next step?
I applied to one school. I wrote one letter of application, did one interview, and I've been here since 2000.
You went from Florida State to University of Florida. They recruited you because of your research?
No, I had a chemistry professor when I did my PhD, and she had some contact with science educators in the state of Florida. So I think they had like conferences, and I remember she was the one who came to me and she said, "There's a position opening up at the University of Florida," and she said, "That is your job." She said that is because she said everything that they discussed and described was what I was doing at that point in time, because according to them, it was very rare that you had someone who was pushing the content much more than even the pedagogy, even though I tried to balance both, because I honestly believed, and I still believe, that you cannot teach what you do not know. No matter how good a strategy you have, no matter how you might be dealing with all these contemporary teaching strategies, if you do not understand the content, you will not be able to have the conversations with your students for them to get to the next level of learning. So I pushed that, and I made it quite clear that it has to be understanding the depth of the content, whether you're doing it over in the College of Education or you're doing it over in the sciences. You have to understand what you're going to be teaching. And so she pushed me a little bit, and then she said, send in the letter of the application. And I came for the interview, and I was finished with my dissertation, so I used my dissertation as a basis for my presentation on assessment, and I got it.
And this was appointment into the School of Teaching and Learning?
The School of Teaching and Learning.
Wow. Straight from receiving your PhD degree. Yeah. Eh, So from the research that you did, I saw one of your that you. I know you had more than one research grant, or
Mhm.
can you share with others in terms of you not only were involved in teaching, but you had a love for doing the research,
Research.
and you were successful. Can you share with them about your getting the grants and then your publications?
Mhm. One of the things I learned quickly when I got to University of Florida is that yes, you're a good teacher, but if you want to stay here, you got to be a good researcher. And I realized that, it had to be about doing the research, but getting funding and getting publications. And so I'm working with the student population. Unfortunately, when I got to UF, the pre-service teachers, we had mostly elementary pre-service teachers, and that I got all of that experience from Tallahassee when I worked with the pre-service teachers. So that worked in my favor. So I started going out into the elementary schools in Gainesville because even though I taught pre-service elementary teachers as a grad student, I knew I needed to understand the school system more. So I'm preparing these pre-service teachers and sending them out into the schools. So I took it on myself and I visited a number of schools, elementary schools in Gainesville. I offered myself to do a workshop for the teachers. I did. I'd do a workshop here and I'd leave my materials and I'd go back a month after and the things are still sitting there, Oh, I'm so glad that you came back, so now. And after a while, it dragged on me because I was beginning to understand that that was taking up my time. I wasn't getting to where I wanted to get to if I wanted to stay at University of Florida. And so it, I continued. And then I was sharing with some colleagues, I was getting frustrated, and I said to them, I cannot find a school or a set of teachers, that I could really work with and begin to develop my research agenda. Assessment wasn't cutting it at that point in time. It was all, from my perspective, it was how do I get teachers to teach science in these elementary classrooms? And how do I prepare my pre-service teachers to be effective when they get into the classrooms? So I was sharing with a couple of my colleagues, and I'm like, I'm really getting frustrated. I would drive on my own time and money up into Jacksonville, to go visit a school, to have conversations with teachers, to see if I could become immersed in their school system. And I did it so many times. But anyway, I was sharing it, and one of my colleagues said, "Why don't you talk to Dr. Bondi? She has connections in a school across town." So I went to Dr. Bondi, and she said, "Yes, I will introduce you to Dr. McNeely at Duval Elementary." And we made the connections. That was it. She just opened up her school and she said, "Come on in, Rose." And that really laid the foundation for my research, laid the foundation for me really beginning to understand what was happening in Gainesville in terms of students learning and teachers' relationship with the learners. So now I was beginning to see schools on the east side, schools on the west side, because I got into the schools.
You didn't give up. I mean, when you first started, you kept probing and tried to identify. You even sacrificed to drive up to Jacksonville to find something, and you found the individual that had the key that opened up your research world.
But even though the school I went to in Jacksonville, it was one of the students that I taught in my first year, and she got employed at this school in Jacksonville. And she mentioned it to her principal that there is this person who taught me science, who taught me how to teach the way I was teaching. And that was what she introduced her and invited me, but I could not get the that push from the faculty or to really, and more so it was far.
But what you just said, you impacted a student and they felt that made a difference in terms of what they thought and how they who they want to become.
Mm-hmm.
It takes one at times to keep moving forward, doesn't it?
So, when I got across to Duval Elementary, I I did some observation first. I spent a couple of hours really observing the teachers, how they were teaching, observing the students, the relationships, that were I could observe across the different groups. And then I said, okay, let me demonstrate. So I would go there 2 days per week and I would teach these classes. I mean, the first time I did a group activity in a grade 4 class at Duval, so I had all my little organized kids and I had them set out in the room. They were going to work in teams. So had them organized and they had the things on the table. And I remember I observed a little boy and he took the two plastic cups and he stuck them under his arm. It was his. He was not going to share it with anybody. And that gave me a ding in my head. This kid was not used to working in a team. Collaboration and cooperation, certainly not in their experiences. And in one of those classes also, I think I was looking at air pressure. So I had a number of different stations where the kids would go and they would have the experiences, and then we would talk about their observations, and then I'd help them to get to the point where they understand, pressure and air pressure. And I saw this little girl, and I think she may have done the first one and the second one, and there she was yawning. I'm like, why? And she said, boring. You know why she was bored? From the second activity, she knew what the content was. She knew where I was going with that. And so I'd gone in, thinking that they didn't. So I learned from them, working with them at that point in time, that sometimes we underestimate them because we do not give them the right kinds of experiences. And so I became,
We make too many assumptions.
and many times it's really, there's a deficiency from our part. And so I learned from that little girl. And so I got interested in African American girls and their experiences in schools. And that led to the very first NSF grant that I got, where we looked at rising African American girls as they go from the elementary school into the middle schools in Gainesville. And so I had them at Duval, and then I followed them into their experiences at the middle school. That was a real eye-opening, It was sad, but it was eye-opening. It was real life experiences of these African American girls, and they were able to articulate why they weren't learning, why they weren't enjoying school, why their learning needs were not being met. So here I am building up a reservoir to understand. So then as a science teacher educator, how can you work with your pre-service teachers or even the teachers in schools to at least help them to realize the value of maybe looking at teaching in another way, And that led me to go deeper in looking at girls and science learning. And so I developed the course Inquiry-Based Science Teaching, which actually became one of the courses with a little bit of modification that was used in your program. So I had students, by then I had students coming from across campus, like from agriculture, from psychology. There were these graduate students who were interested in teaching, and they had some kind of a science base. And so this course was actually one that would meet their needs. And so I had them in a master's course, I had them going across to Duval to do some observation, and then coming across town to do observation at another school, separate and apart from the school across town. And so they spent time in the classrooms, in those two classrooms. Then we came back into the classroom at UF, and they shared their experiences. So they had a big eye-opening to see the requirements and the expectations at the different schools. And out of that, they did a number of, they wrote cases, their own experiences as a case study. So that was the first NSF grant. So I realized that, yes, we can do so much with the students, but as a science teacher educator, the population I need to get into would be the teachers in the schools. I realized that
not the students, but
not right.
the teachers in the schools.
I figured that if I can get the teachers, and to get them to begin to see how valuable the content knowledge is, how valuable the pedagogical strategies are, how valuable it is to really position these kids as learners, and not to use the curriculum as a weapon, but to use the curriculum in a way that transforms the lives of these kids. And that led to an MSP grant that I got with Dr. Linda Hayes from PK Young. And we did some workshop at Lake Butler. We did a couple of summers. But it went well, and it led to, that was called Let's Talk Science. And we had a couple of publications coming out of that work. And so we tried again, and we developed the U Futures grant. First time, they didn't fund it. Second time, they didn't fund it. Third time was the charm. And we got a $5 million to really work with teachers, in-service teachers in the state of Florida. I think we worked with maybe 11 or 13 school districts with middle school science teachers. And by then, I'd learned that the curriculum was so important, because I'd actually had a teacher telling me that what she does, she knows as much science as what is in the curriculum. So the curriculum became the sum total of the content that they knew. And so we found a very good middle school science curriculum that was developed in Michigan. It's called iQuest. And we used that in our program with the teachers. So we developed a professional.
That's where you did the interviews then?
Right. That was
Okay.
That was phase 2
Okay.
for the interviews. So in the first phase, we had the curriculum. We got the teachers, the districts became partners, and we had quite a lot of professional development for the teachers as the program developed. And the teachers were also involved in master's program. So we developed a master's program specifically for the middle school science teachers, and all the principles and the practices that we were embracing became kind of the groundwork for the program. And that was very successful. It was really successful. And NSF, the year after, invited us to do another grant for funding to step this program up. And so we got a pot of gold to go do what you want to in other words, we'd done the first piece and we had a lot of success. Now, what do we need to do to get it beyond the state of Florida? And so I had a grad student at that time, Natalie King, who is now doing wonders in science education, and Dr. Hayes, who was my partner in all of this. So we went to the NSF for some training. They taught us how to write a business plan, how to pivot, all those good things. And then we set out to go across the states to interview school districts, to interview middle school teachers, to find out what they need that could be compacted into a professional development program that could help. And so we went to quite a number of states. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but I remember going to Texas and going into how many different school districts in the state of Texas. We went to New Jersey. Yeah, we went to Georgia. We went to North Carolina. We went to quite a number. And it was a fun time, interviewing all these teachers. And even in the state of Florida, interviewing those school districts that we hadn't worked with in the first. And so we developed a program. Again, we call this U Futures 2.0. And out of those 2 NSF grants, that really funneled my research into understanding what happens with middle school teachers and what they do need, the kinds of support that they need to become more effective in science teaching. So it was an exciting time. We wanted to continue, but of course, at a point in time, the districts do not have any funding. The university did not support beyond the grant. And so, that kind of it died down a little bit. But I still use the principles and the practices in my everyday teaching. But I think one of the crowning thing coming out of those programs was I was able to write a book where I gave voices to the teachers during the professional development program. So,
And the name of the book?
Researching Practitioner Inquiry as Professional Development, Voices from the Field of Science Teaching. So I actually looked at um, one of the research that we do with classroom teachers is for them to really investigate their own teaching. They look at, they make notes, they make their plans, and they teach, and they review and revise, and they reflect.
So is this like metacognition?
There are levels of metacognition in the process, but it's the teachers developing case studies of their own practices. They have their questions, and they seek to respond to these questions. And so at each level, they learn and they move on. So it is researching practitioner inquiry. So in science, we think of inquiry. You ask a question and you set out how to answer it. These teachers are practitioners, so they are making the inquiry on their own practices. What was neat about the book is that it was their voices. I told their stories. So each of those teachers in the master's program, they had to develop a thesis, a study of their practice. And so they had their questions. Like one lady looked at reading in science. So she was getting students in her 7th grade who could not read. And so what is that she needed to do to help them to read and to be able to move into learning science?
So Rose, earlier you talked about students doing their self-assessment. Then you bumped it up, teachers do their self-assessment. There's your storyline, and it just keeps evolving, correct?
Yes, it sure does.
But look at your role that was able to see that. Look, keep looking forward to be able to ask these questions.
One of the things that I embraced early was this whole idea of reflecting on your own practice. And so I'm teaching, I'm observing what I'm doing. I may not be doing it, intentionally, but I do. So I'm teaching and I ask questions. So at the end of my teaching, as I think about it, as I reflect on what I did, I can look back and I say, well, I wasn't so successful today. Why? So the next time I get into my classroom to teach again, I'm not going to make the mistakes I made before. I am going to do things differently. And that is something that I've tried to get my pre-service teachers to appreciate. And I'll say to them, and sometimes I tell them, I'm like, yesterday or the last week when I asked a question and you did not quite understand the question, or you never did this, I said, it bothered me. And so in today's class, I am going to make sure I got that piece right. So I'd share with them. Sometimes I wrote my reflection in the early years. I would write my reflection on my computer, and I would print copies and share it with them so that they can see that I'm actually reflecting on, because that is how you make changes. And so there is, it's called Sean, S-C-H-O-N. He does a lot of work on reflection. S-C-H-O-N was a researcher. And so the whole idea of looking back, making your observations, and then making changes moving forward. So that has been the essence of becoming better. And it's part of the whole self-assessment, because once you're able to look back at what you did and begin to ask yourself the question, why did I do this? What difference did it make? Okay, so what do I need to do? And so my action is going to be different based on my self-assessment.
How many teachers do you think are out there that does like what you do? In terms of, sometimes you think of a teacher, you think of them in front of the class of students teaching or going over a concept or whatever. But you're talking about a teacher that is active, sort of like, exaggerating 24/7. They do something, but then they're assessing, and then if they don't think it's quite optimal, they're going to change. And so the next day is a little different than yesterday, right?
I did some work trying to understand from the teacher's perspectives if they're doing it, and if they're not, why. And I think it was done in, I think it was before 2013 when the science test in Florida was very crucial, where teachers were they were being penalized if their students were doing well. So the teachers, what I learned from that research is that their focus was on getting the students to pass the exam, do whatever they needed to do. And in most cases, it was reading comprehension. So to them, spending time to reflect, spending time to write a diary, spending time to really write what you're going to do next was a waste of time, because what they were expected to do is whatever it takes. And then what I found, it was all reading comprehension. You go into a science class and the kids are reading and then answering the questions. So I can understand, and the pressure from that end.
Yes, I agree.
However, some of the teachers that we worked with, I can tell you that some of them are doing exceptionally well. They've moved out of the actual school system. Some of them are in school districts. I have seen things on the internet from the state where, and I know the teachers, I see them putting out science activities that we did in the program, and the way how they express it. I know they've left with something, but the requirements in schools these days, I think sometimes, really constrain the teachers in terms of the things that they need to do.
And in terms of for them to have time to be rewarded even for something besides teaching, like asking research questions, etc. As I recall, that I saw online is that more than once you were recognized as Teacher of the Year at University of Florida College of Education, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you did scholarly activity in terms of the garnering NSF grants that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. Plus, you wrote papers, and you have a list of your peer-reviewed publications, correct? Mm-hmm. So it must be something that was rewarding to you, but that took time away from you sort of teaching per se as well, right?
This was something that I had made a commitment to myself a long time ago, that regardless of the expectations of the university, I was not going to be, for want of a different word, a slacker teacher. And all my colleagues knew that was where my interests lie. I did the research, I did the grants because that was survival, but I never did a shortchanging on my teaching. I put my heart into my teaching. Did that bode well for my entire career? I don't think so, but that's okay, because I really think I accomplished what I needed to do in terms of my teaching. I went to a school, I was invited to this school, and I went out. There was a student I had taught maybe 10 years before. So I popped into her classroom and I sat at the back. And there she was teaching, and she asked a question to her class, and she went like this. And I knew exactly what she was doing, because I do that. When I ask a question in my classes, I give them wait time so that they can think before they answer. And I saw her doing that. When at the end of the class, I went and I hugged her. I really did, because she got it.
How many seconds was that?
About 4.
4 seconds. Mm-hmm. You asked the questions and then you kicked.
I just tapped. 4 seconds, so I gave them time to really think before they answer. And I never take the first answer only. So you spread the answer around the room, because then if you take the first answer, then you're going to shut everybody else down. But then you get a variety or a range of answers. Then you can have a conversation. Why is it this answer is different from this answer? What were you thinking? Because that's what we want our K through 12 students to be doing in the classroom. We want them to be using their heads. We want them to think critically. We want them to be able to have conversations among themselves, and then have conversations in a larger group, because that's how you know if they have that depth of understanding.
Rose, what would you say is your philosophy of teaching?
I think
Specifically of science education teaching.
my philosophy of teaching is that you can teach science to anyone as long as you are intellectually honest. And that may not be, that's not original, because I'm sure somebody has said this before. But I think that you can teach science to anyone as long as the teacher, is intellectually honest. Because like my husband was a math teacher, and we had tons of conversations about this. And I would say to him when he's drowning because the kids aren't understanding, I say, think of your math teaching as going up a staircase. I said, you are up on the 7th. These kids missed round 2, 3, and 4. You cannot get them to 7 after you've missed this. So what you need to do, you have to make sure that those 3 pieces are in place before you get there. And that is what I mean by intellectually honest.
Rungs of the ladder.
You have to understand what your students know, where they are, because it doesn't make sense. You are teaching them something that they do not have the foundation or the basic to make sense of it. So when I'm doing this with my pre-service teachers, I'll say, I'm going to teach you guys how to make Jamaican jerk chicken. They've all heard of Jamaican jerk chicken. So they'll talk about, that they're happy. And then I start saying some things that they have no idea of. So I talk about the way how the wood is placed. I talk about the seasonings that we use. And it's like, what? And I'm like, see, that's it. So let me step back. Now I have to tell you about the pimento wood, tell you about the odor, tell you about how it is burned. So I have to set the basics for you to understand how the chicken is going to be jerked later on. And so that's it. So I know where their deficiencies are. I know where the weaknesses are. I know the missing link. And so to get them to where I've planned, I have to step back.
How do you help the student with their self-discipline then? I mean, you tell them where you'd like for them to go. How do you develop the intangible aspect of becoming educated?
So let me go back to the Jamaican situation. When I was a high school teacher, it's different from here because the teacher had the authority to, if you're being disruptive, then you can be disciplined and there's nothing there, right? What I found here is that there's a very fine line that the teacher has to follow with respect to, working with the students in the classroom. Like, for example, you would never, if you tell a student to stop talking in the Jamaican classroom, the student understands stop. Here, and I've seen this in the classroom, where you tell them to stop and now they're arguing with you rather than stopping. But one of the things I've learned, and it has been difficult, is that if you engage your students mentally and physically in the classroom and they are doing the science and making sense of it, there's less disciplinary issue to deal with. I've seen that happen in classroom. And yes, these are experiences and situations where you've pretty much set up. So you have a class where the kids are disruptive, or it's a noon class where you have a couple of students who aren't participating. Assign them something to do. Let them put a tag on. Let them name themselves, as a scientist. Let them be the person in charge of the timekeeping. Let them be the materials manager. Assign the students things.
They're active.
They're active, physically and mentally,
yes.
in the classroom. Is it going to deal with all the disciplinary issue? No. Is it going to make your life a little bit easier? Yes. Sure does.
And it can make a difference for one or two or more of those students that choose to be active in the process.
I wish I had my book, but in one of the teacher's story in the book, and she wrote this about a class here in Gainesville. She had come to Gainesville because her husband had come in med school to finishing his program, and so she took a job at this middle school in Gainesville, and so she became a part of our team. And she said she had 6 boys in this classroom that were driving her crazy. So when she got to the place where
Just 6?
No, those 6 were. I think they were like the basketball player, they were the sports
athletes.
people, right? They gave her a hard time. And from the experiences in our program, she decided, she started practicing some of the things that we're doing. So she went out to watch them play football one evening, and the two of the boys came up to her and said, "Miss, what are you doing here?" And she said, "I came to watch you guys play." And those two boys, they got on her. They said, "No, you're lying. You didn't come to watch us. You came to, And she pushed and she pushed and she pushed. And then when it got to the time when she was writing her thesis, she decided that she was going to look at motivating these sports guys in science. And she got them together and she told them what she was doing. She said she told them that she was this was doing her program, and she asked them to help her in getting to the end of her program. And she started doing things, and she pushed. She said she would talk with them, she would sit with them under the tree, and she made them feel that they had value, and they warmed up to her to the point where those boys would come to class early. They would be the ones calling the others from the outside to come in. They would be the ones to tell the others to be quiet and to do whatever was happening. She developed the relationship. It was more about the relationship that she developed with those boys.
It's a heart.
And they saw it. But towards the end, she said, one of the boys said, they were having like a post conversation, and the guy asked her, "Miss, did you do well in your program?" And she told them yes. And then the boy asked her if it was the onus was on her program or was it on them. He asked her, and she said it was both. She needed to do her program, but what was most important to her was getting them into at least wanting to come to class.
Accountability.
And it worked.
It reminds me of that saying, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And the other thing that I tried to have done is to let them know that I believe in them, and that's what you have said that in so many words as well, in terms of activities and whatever.
And even with our pre-service teachers, because when I just got to Gainesville, those elementary teachers never wanted to teach science. They somehow wanted to teach reading. They didn't, not even math. They didn't. They said, "Oh, I did my science classes in high school," or "I'm not going to teach science. I'm going to be doing social studies. Or I'm going to do art." Science was something that others did, and so I had to, in a way, at the very beginning, help them to believe that they could learn science. And so in the same way, in the K through 12 classroom, you had to get them involved and engaged. I had to get those, third and fourth year college students into doing science. We'd go outside, we'd do things on the outside in the over by Norman in the yard. Yes. Just to get them to, and they enjoyed it, a lot of them. And I've had times where there's a school in South Florida. I guess they've stopped now. The principal would send me emails at the end of a school year, and she's asking me if I had a student or if I had another student who could, that I could recommend for them.
I'm sure that it was not uncommon. People would call you for references.
For references.
Do you have, as you look out there, do you have words of wisdom? Any more words of wisdom? You shared a lot, but for those that are out there, our Ashleys and our Nancys, what would you say to them?
They have to believe in themselves that they can make a difference. I think being a teacher or being an educator is more than a calling. It takes, your sense of self, you have to step beyond your sense of self and realize that you're important in that relationship, but you're not the most important person in that relationship. And you got to believe that the learners can learn. Because it doesn't make sense. If you do not think they can learn, then you will not do what it takes for them to learn. And kids come to your classrooms even at the college level, the students come to your classrooms with their own issues, and those do impact what happens in the classroom. So, as an educator, as a teacher, what do I need to do to help my students to make sense of what I am learning? Because, Dr. Ray, I think that learning is a personal experience. The learner has to make sense of it for him or herself. And so the role of the teacher is to really provide the students with the kinds of experiences so that they can make sense of it for themselves. And so that takes a little bit more than being in the classroom for 60 minutes or 90 minutes.
Or 50 minutes.
Yes. So that's it. I think, because if I believe learning is something that you do, then I have to give you the opportunity for you to do it.
Yes.
So
you're so wise. and I'm honored to have the opportunity to hear you share your thoughts and your experiences, and because it's made think of the differences you've made because of your research and your philosophy on the past students who are out there being the teachers today. I'm sure they'd be very, very proud to know that you were the ones that you led the way for them. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for thinking that I had something to share. Thank you.
It's invaluable. Rose, I wanted to give you this. I would like for you to open it. It's blue. Go ahead.
Okay.
And you can just push it one way or the other.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. So far, so good. Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Okay. That's blue. That's orange.
Yes.
Dark.
Yeah.
So it's a whistle.
Yes, it's a lantern.
Okay.
And it has on there stroke, stroke, kick, kick. And it's, I wanted you to have that and put it around your neck because I think you're a coach. You
do?
I really do. I mean, you're a teacher at heart, but you're also that coach that helps guide them, help them to practice, to become, and then you ask them to get on the field and demonstrate what you've shared with them and what they put into this.
This is really nice.
And Stroke talks about it takes effort. It's I won't tell you the story about the frog, but it's a perseverance, self-discipline, never give up in the process. And Stroke, anytime there's some other questions to be asked, whatever, the only thing they have to do is put effort in and stroke, kick, kick. It takes energy to move forward around buoys or around assignments. But I wanted to share that with you, that I think you're a very innovative teacher, coach, and I just want to recognize for your efforts.
Thank you so much. This means so much. Stroke, kick, kick.